as we begin, but I'll go ahead and begin. So thank you all so much for joining us at Composer's Curriculum Design webinar on environmental citizenship. I'm Jacqueline. I'm here representing Composer today, and along with my colleague Amanda, you can wave, our new head of strategic partnerships. And we have 4 panelists from different content providers, which you'll hear from them later. We're really excited to have you all today and excited to also connect with educators from around the world. So again, for those who may have just popped in, there's the chat function and also the Q&A function. We'll be taking questions from the audience to our panelists at the end of the program. So feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we will try to get to them. So just a little overview of what we're going to be looking at today. I will give an overview of Composer if you're all new to Composer and the platform, as well as our curriculum design framework. Then we'll hear from Hannah from Voiceless. She designed the curriculum learning journey that we're going to be looking at today and taking a deeper dive into for environmental citizenship. And she'll share a little bit about her process and reflections on creating that curriculum. And then we'll dive into a panel discussion, both on curriculum design and environmental citizenship as a topic and why it's important for students. And then we'll take Q&A from the audience, and then I'll wrap up with some tangibles that you can take home today and hopefully helpful. So I just want to start with a really warm welcome to all our panelists. I'm super excited to have you all and have you all together. These folks represent some amazing organizations that we partner with, that Composer partners with. So we have Lee Martin from High Resolve, so you could wave, Director of Curriculum and Impact. Clary Von Lee, the Executive Director of Global Oneness Project. Hannah Lucas, Education Program Manager at Voiceless, the Animal Protection Institute. And Mallory Tuaminen, Director of Professional Learning from World Savvy. So I'll start by giving a little overview of Composer for those of you who it's new for. So Composer is a digital platform and we're a global marketplace for educators to access and design high impact curriculum and citizenship education. So we have a library of over 1,000 learning experiences on our platform that educators can access for free. And we also have an interactive design studio where educators can sequence these lessons and resources together to create high impact learning journeys and curriculum for their students. And so what is citizenship education? Citizenship education at Composer, we define as equipping the next generation to act for the well-being of themselves, their communities, and the planet. And we also think of it through these 4 different lenses of global competency, social emotional learning, social justice, and civic learning, and where these areas may overlap and complement each other. And at Composer, we source content from a variety of providers. So you'll see here logos from 35 providers. These are all organizations whose content we have on Composer and we partner with. You may see some big familiar names such as Facing History and Ourselves or iCivics, and also some smaller emerging organizations. But all of them, their content falls into one or more of the 4 areas of citizenship education. And also we're all really committed to helping and supporting educators in empowering their students to grow into more responsible and thoughtful citizens. So the power of Composer is designing curriculum, so accessing and designing curriculum. So say, for example, I want to design curriculum in environmental education, what we'll be looking at today. So this is an example of a sequence of learning in environmental education. So I may decide that I want my students to address a certain environmental issue in their community or work on their advocacy skills and develop as citizens of the world. And so I can sequence different learning experiences from different content providers together, and they complement each other so that we reach these overall learning outcomes for my students. So a little bit about our curriculum design framework at Composer. So at Composer, we support educators in designing curriculum for student mastery. And we do this by taking all of our content from different sources, different organizations, and translating it all into a common visual language, where we call an element a single learning experience, and a string is a sequence of elements or sequence of learning or learning journey. And there's 3 types of elements that are different parts of the learning journey. And they're represented on the site by 3 different shapes: a triangle, a square, and a circle. So it's really easy to distinguish them in a visual format on the platform. So the first type, a peak experience, you can think of as an aha moment or a hook. So this is the first item that a student might experience in a learning journey or in a string. And peak experiences introduce new knowledge. They demonstrate the value of a new skill or topic, and they also provide motivation for student to want to learn more. They're usually really immersive, memorable experiences, and some examples include workshops, museum visits, or powerful films. The next element type in a string is a repeated practice. So repeated practices move knowledge or skill from working memory into long-term memory. So it moves the knowledge that a student may learn in a peak experience into their long-term memory. And they generally increase in complexity and difficulty as the student moves through the string. And you can think of them as your typical classroom lessons, such as activities, exercises, reading and writing. And finally, we have real-world applications. So real-world applications are opportunities for students to apply what they've learned in the classroom to outside of the classroom. And they're a culmination of effective practice throughout the previous portion of the learning journey. They're usually action-based, oriented outside the classroom, and some examples include community service projects, service learning projects, and campaigns. So we take these 3 elements and we string them together into a string. And together they make up a completed learning journey for a student that will really ensure that a new topic or skill sticks, essentially. And here, these are some tips for creating strings, to draft learning outcomes at the beginning of a string, to frame what you want them to be for students, focus on explicit goals in a holistic manner, to frame how you may want the sequencing to go with specific elements. And starting the string with a peak experience. This ensures that the students have that hook moment or that aha moment at the beginning of a string to pique their interest and their motivation and curiosity. And then repeated practices in the middle allow students to repeatedly practice the new topic or skill and increase with difficulty as they go. And then a real-world application has to come at the end of a string so that students have the opportunity to put what they've learned into practice after they have completed the rest of the string before it. So if you're wondering, how am I going to remember all of those rules and tips? You don't have to. On Composer, we have an interactive Create Studio. This is one of the main features of our platform. And here is where you can drop in elements from any of our content providers, search our library of over 1,000 elements, drop the elements into the Create Studio, and change the sequence, add, delete, as you like, as you build the learning journey or the string. And as you go, you will receive real-time feedback, both from our little string bot up here, who gives tips on how to improve the strength of your string, and then also from the string strength meter here on the right, which shows the current strength of the string. And once you add to it, take away, the string strength meter will change and let you know when you've reached maximum impact for the learning journey. So now I'll turn it over to each of our panelists briefly to give us an overview of each of their organizations, what they do, and what they'll be speaking about today. So I'll turn it over to you, Lee, first.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Hi, everybody. I'm Lee from High Resolves. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. So High Resolves is a non-profit organisation that works with high school students to teach them about citizenship. We do that via facilitated workshops that can be run either face-to-face or, since COVID, we can now do those remotely as well. And they focus really on those ideas of a collective identity and social justice and how we can work together to bring about positive social progress. There's typically a 2-hour workshop in school with 60 students. They would go through some stuff. We would provide some activities with them and try to get them up and moving around, and then facilitate a discussion based to meet the students where they're at, but direct them to where we're thinking about these ideas of identity and justice. In addition to that, we provide examples of repeated practice that Jacqueline mentioned earlier on. So our face-to-face workshops and our online workshops are peak experiences. We also provide opportunities for repeated practice, where we provide resources for teachers that they can run in school, run in classrooms, or they can get students to do them via a self-directed version on a different platform. And to make all that stick, we also work with teachers to give them the confidence, skills and motivation to actually be able to deepen the learning for those students and provide them with some confidence and some skill building around those. In terms of this string, we've provided two of the peak experiences, one around a movie to Koina Skatsi, which looks at the disconnect between, the growing disconnect between the way humans live their lives and the planet, and Better Self, which looks at different ethical profiles and how we need to better understand our own ethical profile and that of others if we're going to work with those to bring about positive social change, or environmental justice in this case. And also are an example of repeated practice, which uses a game to look at the tension between self-interest and collective interest. And in this example, it's about what happens if you do overfishing. Jacqueline, is that the kind of detail? Do you want to go more now or go later?
Absolutely. No, that was great. Thank you so much, Lee, for that great introduction overview. So now I'll turn it to Clary Von Lee from the Global Oneness Project.
Hi, everybody. I'm Clary Von Lee. Hope this finds all of you well. So I run the Global Oneness Project. We're based out of Northern California, about an hour and a half north of San Francisco. We've been around for about 13 years. And we're a free platform. So we provide stories for meaningful learning. So those stories kind of show up in the form of short documentary films, photo essays, and essays, as well as curricula. And we explore complex issues like climate change, migration, social justice, and sustainability. And then through those stories, we aim to inspire students through engaging dialogue, learning activities, with the aim really to foster empathy, resilience, and a sacred relationship to our planet. So some of the questions that we think about are, how can we bear witness to our world through stories? And how might the simple act of bearing witness to our world provide opportunities to reflect on our own experiences as well as others? And some of the resources that we provide are in this string are 4 different lesson plans that are based on 4 different stories. The first one is called Investigating the Impacts of Palm Oil, which students explore photographs about the human impacts of the palm oil industry in Myanmar. The second one is called The Consciousness of Nature, which is based, or companion story based off of an essay by Llewellyn Armstrong. And her essay is called Small Talk, Life on a Farm, which really kind of dives into these small interactions that we have with the living world and how we can become more engaged. The third is called Protecting Wilderness. And this is a companion to our film Among Giants. And that film is about an activist for first Humboldt, who kind of risks injury and incarceration to live in the canopy of an ancient redwood tree. So that lesson really dives into activism for trees. And then the fourth is called The Value of Listening. And this is based off a film called Sanctuaries of Silence, which is a 360 VR piece, which really takes you on an immersive journey with an acoustic ecologist named Gordon Hempton into the Hoh Rainforest in Washington State, which is one of the quietest places in North America. So I'll talk a little bit about components of each of those and how they relate to our topic of environmental activism and change makers.
That's a beautiful overview. Thank you so much, Clary. And now I'll turn it to Hannah Lucas from Voiceless, the Animal Protection Institute.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Hannah, and I'm also up early this morning in Sydney, and I'm the education manager at Voiceless, which is the Animal Protection Institute. Voiceless has been around for about 16 years now, but in the education space for about three and a half years. So still quite new in that space. Our vision is to create a world where animals are treated with respect and compassion. And we think that the best way to do that is through education. So we have two education programs, ALE, which is animal law education. Animal law is now taught in 16 universities across Australia, and that's growing. And we're really excited about that new burgeoning field of law. And we also have our Animal Protection Education program, which is our high school education program. And that's linked to the Australian curriculum. And we produce a whole suite of resources on different animal protection issues and topics. So some of those topics are animals in captivity. In particular, we look at dolphins. We also look at the issue of legal personhood and whether or not animals could be granted legal persons, the rights that we have as human beings. We also have just recently produced a whole unit of work on live export and the live export trade across the world. We also look at sentience of animals, the capabilities of animals, and we do that through a number of resources. So we produce fact sheets and short explainer videos for students, lesson plans, infographics, podcasts. And more recently, we've been branching out now to produce teacher guides as well to help teachers to facilitate those lessons within their classrooms and give them a little bit more information and courage to teach those topics that sometimes they may not be familiar with. The lessons that appear in the string are based on the live export trade. One of which is live export and geographical issues. So exploring not only the impact of live export on the welfare of animals, but also the environmental impacts that the live export trade has on various different aspects of the environment. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. And the second lesson is citizenship and action, and really thinking about some case studies around the world, particularly New Zealand, who have been able to just last month stop the live export trade out of New Zealand, mostly from the power of citizens getting behind that and being able to really spark change. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. And finally, I'll turn it over to Mallory Tuominen from World Savvy.
Hi, everyone. I am Mallory. I am with World Savvy, the Director of Professional Learning here. I am based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. However, we have offices and presence in San Francisco and New York and various other areas across the United States. So World Savvy is a national education nonprofit working with educators and community leaders to really reimagine learning for the 21st century and create inclusive, future-ready schools where young people are prepared to thrive in a fast-changing world. So we envision a K-12 education system that prepares all students with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions, what we call global competence, for success and active engagement in a global community. So we work with educators, we work with districts and schools to create partnerships to embed global competence into teaching and learning and culture across classrooms, across schools, across districts. And so that takes a variety of different shapes, but really is focused deeply on educator professional learning and coaching. And so while we have many resources, a couple of which I'll talk about today on the Composer platform, we also really work deeply with educators to embed those resources into their curriculum and content and support them throughout that process. So one of the element that's present in the string today is what we call our knowledge to action framework. So we utilize a project-based approach to learning that is embedded or fused with human-centered design. So some design thinking methodology as well that really takes students from building background knowledge around an issue of relevance, of importance, of local connection to them, and taking them through a design process to actually engage in action in their local communities. And so facilitating them through that multi-step process, and the string that is present in this, or the element rather that's present in this string, will take educators through that process and build off the learning of the other elements within the string. So looking forward to talking more about that and its application to environmental citizenship.
Great, thank you so much, Mallory. So now we will take a moment to look at these elements that everyone has been speaking to, and we'll take a look at Hannah's string that she's created with all of these elements. So this is directly on the Composer site, and I will turn it back to Hannah to tell us more about her design process as she built this and designed this, and what she learned and her reflections.
Okay, thank you. So I guess, although Voiceless has been a provider on Composer for some time now, actually since it first began, this has been my first opportunity to get my head around strings and string design. So I thought it would be most useful for me to talk like on a real practical level of how to go about designing this string, which is actually done, I need to add, along with Sarah Dorman at the Global Oneness Project. So we did do this collaboratively over email. So I just want to say thank you to her as well. So yeah, excuse me if there are some listeners on the call who have already been designing strings, and this is maybe a little bit repetitive for you, but I hope you get something from it. So I guess first of all, I really just began by brainstorming the theme of students as environmental change makers, and what that meant to me personally as an educator, but also of course what it meant to Voiceless. And then also I needed to explore the other providers as well, and really get an understanding of their work and what they do, so that I could make sure that their visions were also seen throughout the string. I then launched into the search function on Composer, which I have to say, I sort of approached with trepidation because there are so many resources on there, but I found it incredibly user-friendly. And on a very practical level, I searched by keywords, by provider, and then by element as well, to make sure that I was ticking off the 3 different types of elements within the string. Of course, it generated a wide range of lessons that were all linked to the theme in some way. And then my next step was really to go through and to favorite those lessons, create a subfolder. And that was really handy for me, actually, to create a folder of just everything that I thought was relevant, and that I could go back at a later time and read through the content and the shortlist, and shortlist. For me, I think those opening summaries are really useful for educators, just kind of having a quick glimpse. They're usually really well written and give you a great overview of what that lesson is. That said, I did then go into the lesson content as well, and just had a quick read through and skim to see if that would be applicable to what I was aiming for. And so, of course, the peak experience for this lesson is on the film Koi Anastasi. And I was really struck by the content of this lesson, and I subsequently went on to watch the film, actually. So for me, this was the natural starting point, because I just thought, what better way to begin considering why our planet needs environmental change makers than to think about the idea of balance and existence and the beauty of the natural world. And that really came forward in that lesson. So I thought, great, this is a perfect starting point. And at this point, Sarah Dorman and I began to collaborate a little bit more. we actually chose many of the same lessons in our initial selection. And so we liaised on our choices and what we thought could be added or removed from the string. Initially, it was much longer, and we needed to kind of make that a little bit more condensed. It was actually difficult to choose between some of the lessons because there's so much good content on there. So we had some conversations around that and sort of put forward what we thought would work or not. One thing I was concerned about was kind of just having a balance really between content, between the providers, and then of course with lesson structure and delivery. So not to sort of have too much sort of written content or, you know, sort of written work or visual work or whatever it might have been. Sometimes the order seemed to develop in a really sort of natural way and sort of evolved on its own. And other times it had to be a bit more purposeful. So an example of where the order seemed to evolve really naturally was when I read the essay Small Talk, which Clary, you spoke about a moment ago, Life on a Farm, which is the primary resource in the lesson, The Consciousness of Nature. And it was such a beautiful essay, and I thought it was really important to foreground to students some of the reasons why the environment needs us to start paying attention. And it became really obvious to me that this lesson would need to come before voiceless lessons, which rely in some way on the understanding of animal sentience. So that one I had to sort of put before some of the other lessons. And then lastly, Sarah and I, again, collaborated along with Jacqueline as well, actually, to compose the summary. And then we developed the learning outcomes, again, like using the keywords for continuity throughout that process. So I think for me, actually the most important step of the design process was actually collaboration, because although it is something we can build on our own, I think having that input from colleagues or you know, friends or whoever you work with is really important, because we had that chance to consider the why behind our choices and to really kind of think about the learning journey for students. And so my final sort of takeaways, I guess, from what I learned about string design and what I would kind of encourage for others is put aside the time, consider the journey, like where do you want your students to go? And I think, you know, sometimes there is no concrete endpoint as such. The journey is continual, but where do you sort of want to kind of lead them, and how can you get them there? Collaborate really for best practice. Order, reorder, and that can be done really easily just by dropping and dragging on the function, composer function. But I think also know that that may change anyway, because the beauty of composer and designing these kinds of strings is really that a teacher in the classroom is then open to change that. And I think to just have that flexibility, because for me, I imagine that a lot of the connections between the different elements, the different lessons, the different providers and the content will all happen within the classroom, within discussion, within the activities, and that's where the kind of magic would really come together. So I really enjoyed designing it. I thought it was I thought it was quite a streamlined process, and I really enjoyed just being able to locate all of these incredible resources from people doing amazing things all around the world, and what an amazing platform to be able to access such interesting and diverse educational material.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. I hope everyone had some takeaways from her insights and her journey in building this. And also just to emphasize what you said, on Composer 2, you can tailor the string to your own context. So it's really easy to swap out one or two elements and edit it to whatever your students' needs are. So with that, we will launch into our discussion. So I will, just a sec. All right, so I just have some questions for you all, and feel free to build off of each other's answers. Just jump in if you have some thoughts, and then we'll also save time for the audience to ask questions at the end. So I'll start with, what are your reflections on looking at Hannah's string and seeing your own curriculum in the string? And what do you think will be the impact for students from that string in environmental citizenship? And we can start with Lee or Mallory or Clary. Hannah has already shared her thoughts, so.
I'll go first. So for me, the takeaways and the reflections on that string, I really think it's going to help young people recognize some of the negative impacts that human beings are having on the planet, but also showing them that just because that is the situation now doesn't mean that's the situation it always has to be, and there are positive things that they can do to work themselves and with others to make a real positive difference. So it's not a helpless situation, it's this is where we're at the moment, but this is how we can go forwards to really make a positive difference. So, you know, not just making students feel bad, but going, actually, there's stuff you can do to actually work upon this, and we can bring about positive change.
Yeah, I had a similar perspectives on that. And what I particularly like about the string is that there are so many different entry points for many different learners. So you have, you know, you may have the written word, you may have a film, and to mention, you know, this film that Hannah mentioned has it's just ambient sound. So that is a really incredible resource to really experience the natural world in a different way, the beauty of the natural world. And then you have photography as well, which we all know is very subjective and can provide many different kinds of perspectives without really without saying too much. And, you know, just to say too, that all of these resources are really about people and places and how they're interconnected. So what I like too is that students can provide their findings. You know, the media can be an examination of that, and they can present their findings in different ways. The string also provides many different ways to have research projects, proposing different ideas for personal and collective action. So it's really a great snapshot of how to connect the global to local, and kind of providing solutions and mindsets for students too.
I kind of want to just say ditto to what Clary said. It was a lot of exactly what I was thinking about as I reflected on this string. I think in addition to entry points in terms of different modalities and types of content for students to engage with, I really reflected on and did a lot of my own learning in terms of the topics. So thinking about noise pollution, live export, palm oil, logging, animal sentience, all these different ideas and issues that fall under the umbrella of environmental citizenship, but provide such a rich opportunity for students to learn about different components of that. And as Clary mentioned, to make connections and start to see those as not just separate siloed issues, but all really following under this broader umbrella, and really being impacted by each other and by humans and by the way in which we're engaging with the environment. And, you know, as the element that World Savvy has in here, the knowledge to action piece, then helping students to start to think about what's next. How do I take action, whether that's as an individual or collectively changing practice across communities is really important. And I appreciated that connection between the two throughout the string.
Wonderful, thank you all. So to your point, Mallory, of the umbrella of citizenship, environmental citizenship, and you know how many areas and subtopics are under that. How do each of your organizations approach environmental citizenship, and what does environmental citizenship mean for your work specifically and your content specifically?
Oh, I'll start. At Voiceless, we recognize that environmental citizenship crosses, like, as we've just said, a myriad of different areas. And we tried to fit this into our work as much as possible. And animals are part of our day-to-day, whether we are consciously aware of that fact or not. And our content really shines a light on these topical animal protection issues, because we believe that young people need to sort of be provided with these facts and statistics so that they can start to think critically, to start to ask questions and reflect on their own, like, personal citizenship, their actions and their responsibilities within our world. So I think most, if not all, of our lessons make links to environmental sustainability, which is one of the links to the Australian curriculum as well. So for instance, when we talk about the welfare issues for animals on board live export ships, which comes up in the third lesson of the string, we're of course asking students to consider the physical and emotional impact of such a journey, but also to look into the environmental impact this trade is having. So in addition to it, like, investigating a whole kind of range of reasons why some countries might require live animals to be imported, and discussing the alternatives to that, the larger issue that becomes really prominent is the issue of intensive animal agriculture, or what most people know as like factory farming. So the lesson sort of culminates by students asking students rather to investigate a geographical issue of their choosing, and factory farming could be one of those, to really dig deeper into that. And it's such a pressing concern of our time now. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit about that particular lesson, and how we approach environmental citizenship, with linking into the string as well.
And I'll jump in here to say that, we're story-based. So everything is foundational on the stories themselves. And a lot of times when I start to talk about the environment, I share a story about one of the very first films that we told in 2008, or documented in 2008, was a short film called 1,000 Suns, which documents the Gamo people of Ethiopia have been farming sustainably for 10,000 years. So in the very first clip of the film, you see these Gamo and these indigenous Gamo men who come to New York City for the first time to go to a UN conference, and they're standing on top of a skyrise building, and they're looking down at the city, and then they turn to each other and they say, "Where's the land?" They're completely perplexed. So some of the things that we think about with environmental citizenship is, understanding individuals, including natives and indigenous people who are, indigenous to their land. How is language and ecology interconnected? How can we learn from these indigenous farmers and practices that date back 10,000 years? What does it mean to listen? Something I'll talk about later with this film, Sanctuaries of Silence. What does it really mean to have a sacred relationship to our planet? These are just some questions that we think about, and we bring everything that we bring. We bring universal values into each story and to each lesson, which I think is at the heart of environmental citizenship, because we have to have a relationship to ourselves if we're going to have a relationship to our living world.
High resolves, I think environmental citizenship is very central to what we do. We're all based on the idea of getting more and more people to act in the long-term collective interest of humanity, recognizing that we are one human race, that we are all interconnected. And that also involves the environment that we live in and the impacts of things that we do in one place, how they affect other people. So with live exports, we may be exporting live animals from Australia to Indonesia or to China and stuff, but there's, what's the impact that has on the world, in the animals, the people who work there, the environment, all those things are very interconnected. So we do that all the time. And I think environment-centered citizenship for us is that acting part of it, that young people can make a difference, and to do this, they can act in a positive way. So I think in the string, we've got Koina Sketsi with this disconnects us life out of balance. I think one of the images that really struck me is it starts as an image of people sleeping, sunbathing on a beach. But as you pull back, you see this big power station behind it. And you just kind of get this weird life out of balance kind of thing going on. And then let's go fishing, which is one of the repeated practice elements. People really get to play a game. Students get to play a game that looks at what happens if we just keep on taking stuff in an unsustainable way. What does that actually mean for us? How can we do that and look at those things? And then in our final one, Better Self, which is about understanding the way that you think and the way that other people think, and coming up with strategies about how you can work effectively with those people, because you're going to need to do that if you're going to solve those problems. Just thinking about, well, how do I see the world? How do other people see the world? And how can I find the connections there so we can work together to make a difference, which for us is at the heart of citizenship.
So I'll just share briefly that, as I mentioned, World Savvy, the focus of most of our work is around the idea of global competence. And so thinking about preparing students with those knowledge, skills, and dispositions for success and active engagement in the global community, and that global community being all encompassing, whether it has to do with the environment, around social justice, around civics education, all of those pieces. And so really skills-based for us, thinking about things like building empathy, thinking critically, collaboration, valuing multiple perspectives, all of these components that are core to citizenship, or I'm sorry, environmental citizenship, and really necessary to be stewards of that work. So thinking it from a more of a skills-based and holistic perspective of, while a student might engage in an environmental citizen project with us, they might also take it a different route. And so preparing students with that type of skill and knowledge, agnostic to content, is really core to our work and our mission. But certainly many of our students, recognizing the world that they're living in and the issues that we are currently facing, focus on environmental issues and find those of great importance for them in their local communities.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Beautiful, beautiful overviews and connections. So going off of connections, how do your elements in our string here ladder up to the larger learning journey? And how do they complement and maybe build off of each other's? But also taking the element type into consideration is another way to think about that, and how the different element types build off of one another. So maybe Lee, you want to start with the peak experience.
Thank you. Yeah, so we start off, as Hannah mentioned, with this the film Koyaanisqatsi, which really is looking at life out of balance, and just as a peak experience, getting the students to have an aha moment of going, oh, if I take a step back and look at the world around me, and I can see, you know, I need to take some time to step back and reflect on that. I'll look at that deliberately to see what's going on, rather than taking those things for granted. And then through the discussion guide that's included in the resource pack, you can go through and bring those things out with students. You can look at what's doing there. It's a very powerful film. It's very, as Cleary said, it's just sound. So, you know, as you're using it, you might think, actually, this might not land as well with some students as others, so I might only want to use certain clips for it, and there are certain parts in it you could use. Or even think about, let's take the discussion guide part there about life being out of balance, but use something that's a bit more contemporary, or something else where they can see this disconnect between the way we live our lives and the way that other people live our lives. And hopefully by doing that first, you get this kind of emotional reaction in students that they want to go on and to do something to go into the next kind of lessons.
I can jump in here. I guess something, and I already talked a little bit about the importance of the consciousness of nature to some of the voiceless lessons, because it sort of foregrounds that idea of like awareness and sentience and so forth. But what I noticed that was happening in a sort of organic way and sort of quite accidentally was with the laddering of the lessons was kind of this weaving in and out of the physical environment, animals, and human beings. And I thought that was really interesting, how that naturally evolved and kind of mirrored the idea of interconnectedness itself within the string. And so, for instance, like we see how wildlife is directly and indirectly affected by like the palm oil industry, the power of animal communication and the value of listening lesson, and the impact of deforestation on animals as well. So there was a kind of an interesting blend between the impacts on wildlife in particular as a sort of grouping of animals, which we find young people are like generally able to connect to more and perhaps maybe show a little bit more empathy for. And that's kind of interspersed with the voiceless lessons, which deal with what are deemed as livestock and sheep and cows, who are part of this global trade kind of being shipped across continents for the most part for consumption. And then the enormous impact that has on environmental resources, which is kind of, you know, very rarely discussed in the classroom setting. So I really just like the way that it kind of weaved in and out. And then it kind of comes to a culmination of that, looking kind of directly at us and what we can do in order to kind of combat some of those issues that have arisen during that weaving in and out of animals and place and human beings. So I just thought that was quite a really nice kind of way that it kind of evolved. Yeah.
I can just pick up on what Hannah said. What I really liked about the string was it allowed spaces and different ways for young people to talk about these issues, which wouldn't always normally fit into regular classroom lessons, but they are things that students are passionate about, they want to talk about. So giving them a space to be able to do that, which wouldn't naturally fit up and, you know, go to that innate sense of fairness that we all have as human beings. But students want to talk about these things, but, you know, it kind of can fall through the cracks because it doesn't always, unless you make a deliberate space for this, it's not always something that students will be able to talk about.
Yeah, I like that, Lee. And it makes me think of this quote from Buckminster Fuller, who's an architect and design thinker, who said that children think in terms of wholes. So, but as we get older, we forget. And so, you know, if we think about that, this string is providing us an opportunity to have that whole perspective, but then we're diving into all these different themes and issues. And I think about the sanctuaries of silence and listening. But what both you and Hannah said is there's a quote from the film where Gordon Hempton says, you know, noise detaches us not only from our surroundings, but from each other. And so we ask, you know, what might be the dangers of not listening to each other? What might be the dangers of not listening to nature? And you can also apply that to animals. You can apply that to a classroom setting of not listening to each other. When you start thinking about these tools and strategies that Mallory, you talk about with World Savvy and kind of global citizenry and all of these amazing ways of trying to think in that way. So that's where my mind went with that.
Yeah, I really like that noise distracts us, especially like now, because we have noise in other ways, like in social media and stuff like that. We've got all this noise going on where we can have lots of information, but not actually be listening to or reading or understanding what's going on with that. So I think, you know, having that reinforcing and actually let's take a step back is a really important thing, and make some quiet time to actually be able to really think about this impact and listen to what other people have to say.
I'll just add that I think as we think about the latter, you all have so beautifully talked about the different component pieces and the different elements of the string and how they lead up to a knowledge to action opportunity for students to take that learning and that individual or group collective interest and take that into something more, into action in their local communities. I love that quote, Clary. I mean, I think that's so perfect and so timely. And part of what the framework, the knowledge to action framework in there, is helping students to work together and to think about coming together around common issues or different issues and being able to dialogue and have conversation and listen to each other, which is so important and so key. So I appreciate that a lot.
That's all so beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you all. Sort of going off of some of these same themes, this big question of what are change makers and how do we know if students have been impacted by a powerful learning experience, a learning journey, and they have become change makers?
I'm happy to kick that one off since that's sort of central to a lot of our work. I mean, really simply, a change maker for us is, someone who wants to have or has the desire, wants to change the world, but then actually goes through that process of gathering resources and knowledge and makes it happen, brings it into reality. We think about change and we think about action on a continuum. I think a lot of times folks feel daunted by the idea of action, thinking that students have to be out marching and writing bills, and that's great. We want them to be doing that too, but action is also really about the individual and what personal choices you're able to make and how you're able to change your own behavior. And so introducing that spectrum and that continuum of action is really important. I think when students have been impacted by that powerful learning journey and see themselves becoming change makers, use the term if you want, that's my favorite part of the work. Seeing that light bulb for students and seeing that excitement and that engagement and that agency over their own learning is so powerful and so incredible, I think, is just really important and is often missed a lot. Some of my favorite, experiences that I've had, I'll have students who will come up to us, we'll be working with educators and working with students on a project in a classroom. And, I remember distinctly one girl who came up to me and was like, can I do this outside of my class too? Like, I have an idea. I really want to learn and do this, and make, take some action on this. And she was so excited and so jazzed to like take this outside and do this with her friends and with her family. And so it's seeing that excitement and that light bulb for students really shift, and seeing their agency it's so cool. I could talk about it for hours, but I'll stop.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on what Mallory said. We want young people, change makers are people who make a positive difference, but that can be at a very, very local friends and family level. It doesn't, you don't need to be Greta Thunberg. That's great for the people like that, but just helping students realize that what they do in their everyday life can have a positive impact. And that, yes, let's encourage people to go and protest and build and write bills and become official change makers, but you're not helpless. You may be, students very often, I'm one of 7.2 billion people. What I do doesn't make a difference. But again, actually, no, it does make a difference, and the impact you can have just in your family and friends. So we look at that in our Better Self peak experience, and just going, the difference that you make and how that has an effect on other people. You can act even just as a role model at a very small level to make a positive difference. So you can be a change maker. So I think young people want to be change makers, but sometimes feel daunted that I can't do that. But actually, no, there are some simple steps you can go, and then you can build up if you want to go further.
Yeah, I think Mallory, you defined it as knowledge to action. And I think in terms of that too, in terms of awareness or even attentiveness to action, because I think one quick story, we had a student photography contest, and one theme that we kept seeing over and over, and this was during the early months of COVID, was that students were saying, oh, I hadn't heard the birds like that before, or I didn't notice that there were bees on these flowers right outside my home. So that to me is a change maker, because you are paying more attention to yourself and to your immediate surroundings. And I think once that consciousness starts to shift, there's something changes within the self, and then you start to become more aware of your choices.
I just jump in really quickly, conscious of time. Yeah, I guess for me, it's about opening your heart and mind and taking kind of that leap. And I guess the only other point I would like to make is that I think like role modeling that is really important, because I think yes, of course, we want to encourage young people to be change makers, but I think that we have this generation of teachers and educators who are willing to facilitate these kinds of lessons in their classrooms. And I think that they're also change makers, because they're willing to kind of step away from the status quo and to do something a little bit different. And then that in itself, I think, is also change. So if students see that and that's being modeled to them within their school environment, then that can only be, a positive step forward.
That's wonderful. Thank you all. Definitely lots to think about. And I love the continuum and also your insights from during COVID as well, Clary. So the last question actually is, given the impact of COVID-19 around the world, how does this or might affect how we think about environmental citizenship and also how it's taught in our schools to our students?
Just really simply, I think COVID-19 has shown more clearly than anything else how interconnected we are. The fact that it's a global pandemic, and the actions that we have affect other people very, very clearly, and people can see that. In Australia, we're very lucky with very low cases, but we are in many ways just cut off now completely from the rest of the world, and it's like that can't go on forever. And I think COVID has really brought that home to people to see that the impact that I have and the little choices that I make, whether it's to wear a mask, to do that, has an impact on everybody else. So I think it's really kind of brought home that we are in an interconnected world, and the impact that we have affects everybody else as well.
I just want to read one more quote from Gordon Hempton, the sound ecologist, which I think is a great response to that question. And he says in his TED Talk, he said, if you are going to listen, you have to be willing to change. So I think that those go hand in hand.
That's beautiful. Love your quotes, Clary. Thank you for sharing. So given our time, we will like to wrap up with some questions from the audience. Thank you to my colleagues, Matt and Amanda, for answering some of these. But I will take the question from Tyson Brown. Thank you for your question, which is, what are some strategies for tracking citizenship education in action? That is, how do you measure impact on a student-by-student basis? So I think this is similar to how we were talking about, what is a change maker? And, but more so, how do we track that on a student-by-student basis as an educator? So I'll just open up to the panelists.
I don't really have an answer. I think this is the $64,000 question, though, that if anybody can come up with the answer, that would be great. I think more and more we can, there are platforms that exist, whether you're running the film competition or the photo competition, stories where you can have people who can build a portfolio of stuff that we can see how they're doing that. So we have, we have a platform where students can go through a series of courses and they can build a portfolio, so you can actually measure that. You can see that impact over time. What the hard and fast measurements are for that, I don't know yet, but I think technology is allowing us to go to a situation where sometime in the very near future, we will be able to have that measurement of what it is. It's a tough thing to do, though.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have an answer, but I do have to say that there's something to be said for projects and having, real world applications where students are creating. And from our perspective in these student photography contests, I learned so much from not only students' perspective, but on their reflections from what they created. For example, one student created a photograph that was just a simple photograph of taking a photo of a Zoom on her iPad. And she said in an email she wrote to me, and she said, "Thank you so much for sharing my work when the world was quiet." And so that to me is incredibly powerful. It's not so much tracking, but it is in some ways, and more of a qualitative way, I guess, less of a quantitative.
Wow, that's beautiful, Clary. Thank you for sharing that directly from a student. That's wonderful. So we will just wrap up. I know we are at time. So if you were excited and invigorated by today's conversation, we would love for you to sign up for Composer. It is a free platform, so free for any educator, anyone in the education space. You can find us at composereducation.org, and you can access all the resources that you heard our panelists talk about today. You can access Hannah's string as well as a large library of other strings that are already made. And then you can, of course, design your own from the library of over 1,000 resources and elements from 35 organizations. So with that, we'll wrap up. And we also have just a quick survey for you all that we'll drop in the chat. We are planning to have a series of webinars throughout the year, so we'd love to see you all again. And it will help us in planning for the future. Thank you so much. And we will just stay on for a moment in case there's any lingering questions and give you all a chance to get on the site. Thanks.